From the darkness of an old, forgotten bunker, a German shepherd emerged. His paws were torn, his coat streaked with ash and dirt, his breath shallow but determined. He wasn't supposed to return to this place, not after everything it had seen. Yet here he was, drawn by something older than memory. Inside those rusted steel walls stood two brothers, former U.S. Marines, staring at what remained of their family's legacy, burdened by secrets that had long been meant to stay buried. No one expected the dog to lead them deeper into that ruin. No one believed his instincts could stir the past back to life. But he remembered, the scent of loyalty, of loss, of duty. And what unfolded next would test blood, faith, and the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his dog. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Type your country below. And if you believe no man or animal deserves to be left behind, hit subscribe. Because this story, this one, might just remind you why second chances matter. The air over Hillsborough, Tennessee, in late November, carried a damp chill that clung to the bones. A low sky hung heavy over the ridges, and the wind funneled down narrow back roads, whispering through leafless sycamores and oaks stripped bare by fall. Two brothers drove through that gray countryside in a battered Ford pickup, its heater coughing weak warmth, the corners of its windshield rimmed with frost. The town spread thinly across the valley, red brick storefronts, an abandoned feed mill rusting beside a slow river, and beyond that, forest-covered hills that hid relics of old wars. To Ethan Mercer, every mile closer felt like reopening a wound he had never truly let heal. Ethan, the elder brother, carried himself with the quiet weight of a man who had seen too much and said too little. At 37, Ethan, the elder brother, carried himself with the quiet weight of a man who had seen too much and said too little. At 37, tall and broad-shouldered, he still moved with the discipline of a Marine, but his eyes, a deep gray blue, carried sorrow more than pride. His short dark hair was already silvering at the temples, and the lines at the corners of his eyes weren't carved by age, but by grief. 2 years ago, he had buried his wife, Sarah, a woman whose laughter once filled their small farmhouse in Fayetteville. Cancer had taken her swiftly and cruelly, leaving Ethan hollowed out. Sarah had been tall and slender, with auburn hair that stayed long even through the worst of her illness, her way of refusing to surrender everything. She had been a high school literature teacher, gentle to her students, fierce in her love for stories. She had believed words could heal. But her death, prolonged by insurance denials and bureaucratic delays, had taught Ethan bitterness instead of faith. He stared through the fogged windshield now as though the road ahead led nowhere worth seeing. Beside him sat his younger brother, Cole Mercer, 34, restless, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. He had Ethan's height and lean strength, but his energy was wired tight, his hazel eyes alive where Ethan's were dulled. Cole had always been the fire to Ethan's calm, impulsive, reckless, the one who charged through doors without a plan. He wore his dark hair cropped short, a shadow of stubble on his jaw, his leather jacket worn like second skin. Trouble had followed him in youth, bar fights, broken rules, but in combat, that recklessness had turned into bravery, the kind that dragged brothers out of fire. Cole had never married. Never stayed anywhere long. In the back seat lay Shadow, the German shepherd, 5 years old, his body strong and sleek beneath a coat of silver-gray fur that caught the dim light. His amber eyes were alert, intelligent, and filled with a calm intensity. Shadow had once been a military working dog, partnered with Ethan during his last overseas deployment. Across his flank ran faint scars, traces of shrapnel and survival. After the war, he had become Ethan's anchor, Sarah's comfort, and later, the only living reminder of both. Cole liked to joke that Shadow was the third Mercer brother, the one who never argued. But tonight, even Cole glanced back nervously. Shadow was uneasy, ears twitching, nose pressed against the window, as if he smelled something older than the road itself. They were headed for the reading of Arthur Callahan's will, their late grandfather, a man who had spent most of his life alone in these mountains. To neighbors, Arthur had been an eccentric, a wiry veteran from another war, hands calloused from tinkering, a recluse who fixed engines with wire and a hammer. To the brothers, he was little more than a legend. Now, after his death, he'd left them something, though the lawyer's letter hadn't said what. It only mentioned the Callahan site. Cole had imagined land, maybe a cabin, something to sell, something to settle Ethan's debts. But when their truck turned off the main road onto a dirt path and bumped through the trees into a clearing, what they found was no cabin. The bunker rose from the ground like a wound, a half-buried concrete relic, its walls streaked with rust, its heavy steel doors pitted and scarred by weather. Moss clawed up its sides. A slumped shack leaned nearby, its tin roof caved in. The air reeked of damp stone and iron. Cole whistled low. Some inheritance. Guess Grandpa thought we'd enjoy babysitting a tomb. Ethan stepped out, his boots sinking into the mud. He studied the bunker with a hard, distant stare. Looks worthless. Maybe he wanted to saddle us with the last thing he owned. Cole shook his head. Nah. Old man Callahan wasn't the type to waste his life on nothing. He stayed here for a reason. The wind moaned across the clearing, rattling loose metal. Shadow jumped down from the truck, his paws hitting the earth silently. His tail hung still. His muscles tightened. He sniffed the air, circled once, then froze, his ears pricked toward the bunker's door. Cole crouched beside him, rubbing his ear. What's wrong, boy? Shadow didn't move. He growled, a deep, rolling sound that rumbled through the clearing. It wasn't curiosity. It was warning. Ethan's heartbeat kicked hard in his chest. Cole straightened, his eyes narrowing toward the steel door. The cold wind caught the dog's growl and carried it into the trees. For the first time that night, both brothers felt it, the true weight of their inheritance. Not money. Not land. But something buried, something that wanted to stay that way. The steel doors of the bunker gave a long, protesting groan when Cole pushed them open. The sound echoed through the clearing like a cry from something ancient and unwilling to wake. Cold air burst out, stale and metallic, carrying the scent of rust, old concrete, and time itself. Their flashlights sliced through the darkness, beams cutting across walls streaked with water stains and pipes dripping in a slow, steady rhythm. Their footsteps landed heavy, each echo bouncing through the hollow chambers. Ethan moved with the careful discipline of habit, his shoulders squared, his every motion deliberate, scanning corners as though expecting an ambush. War had left its reflexes in him like scars that never faded. Cole's light darted faster, restless, tracing graffiti, debris, and broken furniture. This place looks like the set of a war movie, he muttered. Between them, Shadow padded silently, claws clicking softly on the concrete. His body was low, his tail stiff, the posture of a trained guardian. His amber eyes followed every flicker of movement. The first room was wide and bare except for a rusted metal table near the far wall. Papers, brittle and yellowed, littered its surface. A cracked leather-bound ledger lay open, its ink blurred by moisture. Ethan picked up one sheet, it crumbled slightly at the touch. Just junk, he muttered, tossing it aside. But Cole had already spotted something else, a tall cabinet against the back wall, its glass doors opaque with decades of dust. He tugged it open, and a cough of air escaped as though the room exhaled. Inside sat rows of journals bound in brown leather, each spine marked with dates spanning nearly 40 years. Cole's whistle was low. Guess Grandpa wasn't wasting time up here. He blew off the dust and flipped one open. Pages filled with sketches of underground tunnels, notes written in precise, engineer's handwriting, and strange symbols drawn with ruler straight lines. Across one page was written, Ashford System. Ethan shook his head, disbelief in his voice. He spent his life chasing ghosts. Old war fantasies. Cole's expression hardened. Or maybe he found something real. Marines don't waste their lives on nonsense. In one corner, half buried beneath a rotting tarp, lay a metal trunk. Cole dragged it into the light and pried it open. Inside were rolled maps tied with twine, thick parchment marked with faded ink. Ethan unrolled one across the table, a topographic map of the Tennessee hills, laced with faint lines that stretched under the earth. At the bottom corner, written in red ink, was a single note, "Vault entrance compromised. Must secure." Ethan snorted softly, bitter amusement ghosting across his face. He was losing it. This is paranoia. Cole ignored him. He was already digging deeper into the trunk. Beneath the maps lay folders of old newspaper clippings, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. The headlines dated back to the 1940s, reports of sinkholes, missing men, rumors of hidden Union gold. Every article was marked up with Arthur Callahan's tight, neat handwriting. "Looks like he was connecting dots no one else could see," Cole murmured. Ethan dropped the folder back into the trunk, his patience thinning. He built a fantasy to make sense of his isolation. But Cole crouched beside a spread-open journal, his voice steady and low. Or he was protecting something worth dying for. "You of all people should know some truths aren't meant for the headlines." Ethan didn't answer. His jaw clenched. He wanted to leave, to seal the bunker behind them and pretend none of it mattered. That's when Shadow moved. The shepherd padded away from the brothers toward the far wall, his body tense, tail straight. He pressed his nose against the damp concrete and whined. His claws scraped the surface, sharp clicks echoing in the silence. Ethan and Cole exchanged a wary glance. Shadow pawed harder. Cole knelt beside him, running his hand along the wall. "What is it, boy?" His fingers brushed a faint groove in the concrete, almost invisible, but deliberate. "Help me out," Cole said, urgency rising. Ethan hesitated, but joined him. Together they shoved aside an old shelving unit leaning against the wall. Behind it, the outline of a seam emerged. Shadow barked once, loud, commanding, certain. Cole jammed a rusted crowbar into the crack and pushed. Brick flaked away, and with a grating scrape, a small section of the wall gave way. Dust exploded outward, thick and choking. Inside the cavity sat a small tin box, cold and intact despite the years. Cole pulled it out carefully and set it on the table. Ethan leaned in while Shadow sat close, eyes fixed, ears flicking. Cole eased the lid open. Inside lay a brass compass, its face clouded with age but gleaming faintly under the light, and beneath it, a folded sheet of paper covered in coded numbers and letters. At the top, written in Arthur Callahan's careful script, were 3 words, Ashford Cipher, page 1. Cole's voice was reverent. He wasn't crazy. Ethan stared down at the compass, the cipher, and the dim reflection of their flashlights in the brass. For the first time that night, uncertainty flickered across his face. The bunker's silence pressed in around them, the steady drip of water, the hum of their breathing, and the faint rumble of Shadow's growl that still hadn't faded. Whatever this inheritance was, it wasn't just concrete and steel. It was a secret meant to stay buried, and now, unearthed by a dog's instinct, it had found them instead. The compass felt heavier than it looked, a weight that carried more than brass and glass. Its dull shine caught the narrow beam of their flashlights like an ember burning in the dark. Ethan turned it slowly in his hand, his thumb brushing the engraved edge, while Cole unfolded the brittle paper beside him. The cipher crackled as it opened, lines of symbols and numbers, drawn in their grandfather's tight, meticulous handwriting. Ashford Cipher, page 1. The word seemed to hum in the stillness. Cole leaned over the table, flashlight steady, his brow furrowed. "It's not random," he murmured. "Look at this, these markings match the grid lines on the map." He spread one of Arthur Callahan's old maps across the table, its edges frayed and corners curling. The compass needle spun lazily for a moment, then steadied, not north, but toward a faint red corridor drawn beneath the bunker's location. Ethan frowned. "Sublevels," he muttered. Grandpa was mapping tunnels under his own land. Cole's grin flashed sharp in the dim light. "Told you he wasn't crazy." But Ethan's skepticism still clung to him like an old habit. "We should call this in," he said finally. If someone else has been down here, it's not our business. Let the sheriff deal with it. Cole's head snapped up. His voice flared, hot and impatient. And let them box it up, classify it, sell the land to Helix or whoever waves a check in their face. No. This was left for us, Ethan. Grandpa trusted us, not the government. The tension between them thickened, as old and familiar as brotherhood itself. Ethan exhaled slowly, jaw tight. You never change. Cole smirked faintly. Good thing. Somebody's gotta keep you from rusting shut. Before Ethan could answer, Shadow stirred. The shepherd had been watching them in silence, but now he stood, nose pointed toward a corner of the room where debris had gathered. His tail stiffened. He whined once, then pressed a paw against the ground. What is it, boy? Cole asked, already moving toward him. Shadow pawed again, harder this time, claws scraping against something metal. Cole crouched and swept aside the dirt. Beneath the layer of dust, half hidden, was a square iron grate bolted into the floor. Ethan knelt beside him, testing the edges. Rust flaked under his fingers. Look sealed. Not for long, Cole muttered, already prying at one corner with Ethan's combat knife. The bolts resisted, shrieked, and then snapped one by one until the grate lifted free. Cold air breathed up from the hole, damp, stale, carrying the faint sting of gunpowder and decay. A narrow stairwell descended into the dark, carved straight into the stone. The beam from Cole's flashlight fell into the blackness, cutting across rough walls that vanished into shadow. Grandpa was busy, Cole whispered. Ethan's instincts kicked in, the trained caution of a Marine in unfamiliar territory. I'll go first. But Shadow moved before either of them. The dog lowered his head and started down the steps, his paws soundless, his movements fluid, every muscle alert. Cole followed next, then Ethan bringing up the rear, the folded cipher and map tucked inside his jacket. The stairwell narrowed as it dropped deeper. Water dripped from overhead pipes, the sound echoing like a ticking clock. Their flashlights flickered over chalk marks on the walls, arrows, numbers, even single words blurred by moisture. Ethan brushed his fingers across one faded mark. He was leaving himself a trail. Cole gave a low whistle. He built an entire system down here. Then Shadow froze. His ears twitched, his head turning sharply to the left. He let out a low growl that reverberated through the tunnel. Ethan swung his light down, and his stomach tightened. Boot prints. Fresh ones. Pressed deep into the damp soil, sharp-edged, not softened by time. Cole crouched, pressing his fingers into one. His expression darkened. Tactical tread, he said grimly. Same kind we wore. These aren't Grandpa's. Ethan's beam caught a glint of brass. He bent down and picked it up, a spent 9mm casing, untarnished. He held it between two fingers, voice cold. Someone's been shooting down here. Recently. The tunnel seemed to tighten around them. Ethan's pulse quickened, his training roaring back to life. He scanned the shadows, listening for breath, movement, anything. We turn back, he said firmly. Bring this to the sheriff. Cole's answer came like a spark off flint. And lose everything before we even understand it? No chance. If someone's down here, we face them on our terms. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct screamed to retreat, regroup, plan, report. But another voice, quieter and older, whispered of truth, of Sarah, of the man their grandfather had been. He gave a curt nod. Fine. But stay sharp. They moved deeper. The tunnel sloped downward, the air thick and cold, the light from their flashlights bouncing off damp stone. Remember when Dad used to tell us stories about miners lost in these hills? Cole said quietly. Feels like we're walking into one. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the trail of boot prints ahead. The passage ended at a wall of riveted steel, dark with rust, bolts thick as fists. It looked like the end, but the sound when Ethan tapped it was hollow. Cole pressed his palms against it, tracing the seams. "This isn't on the map," he said. Shadow approached, nose working furiously. He pressed his muzzle to the base of the wall and gave a sharp bark, a command, not a warning. Cole looked at Ethan, a grin breaking through the tension. "Good boy. You found it." The steel door stood before them, massive and silent, the culmination of everything Arthur Callahan had built. The cipher, the compass, the strange maps, all of it had led them here. And though none of them knew what lay beyond, one truth hung heavy in the cold air: their grandfather's legacy wasn't a ruin. It was alive, waiting to be found. They didn't open the door that night. Caution, not fear, guided them back up the stairwell. Even Cole, restless and reckless, felt the weight of unseen eyes in those tunnels. By the time they stepped back into the cold night air, the moon hung pale over the ridges, and mist coiled through the trees like smoke. The brothers drove back into Hillsborough in silence, Shadow stretched alert in the back seat, head held high, his amber eyes scanning the dark woods that flanked the road. The old compass and folded cipher lay between Ethan's hands on his lap, heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. When morning came, they were parked outside a robin's egg blue two-story house on the edge of town, the home of Martha Hayes, Arthur Callahan's oldest friend. The place stood like a sentinel of memory, white porch rails, sagging slightly, and pots of red geraniums still blooming in the late autumn chill. Martha opened the door before they could knock. At 78, she was tall and still proud in posture. Her hair, once black, was now a crown of white gathered into a neat bun. Sharp gray eyes watched them from behind thin spectacles. She wore a wool cardigan the color of smoke and moved with quiet precision, every gesture exact. "Martha Hayes?" Ethan asked, his tone respectful but tired. She smiled faintly. "You look just like Arthur when he first brought me one of his crazy theories. Come in, boys. And bring the dog. I never trusted a man who travels without one." Inside, the house was a labyrinth of bookshelves. Old maps, framed letters, and Civil War documents covered every surface. The air smelled faintly of parchment and cedar. Cole dropped into a chair, unable to hide his impatience. Ethan remained standing, cautious as always, while Shadow sat beside his boots, eyes never leaving the door. Ethan unfolded the cipher and compass on the coffee table. The journals followed. Martha studied each item with slow, deliberate attention, her fingers tracing the brass rim of the compass. "I see Arthur kept his secrets well," she murmured. "He told me the bunker was just the surface, a mask for something older, something buried since the Civil War." She flipped open one of the journals and turned to a page filled with intricate sketches. "Colonel Thomas Ashford," she said, her voice soft but certain. "A Union engineer who discovered his own officers were stealing soldiers' pay and hiding the evidence. So he designed a vault, deep in these hills, to keep proof safe until the war ended." Cole leaned forward, eyes alive. "You're saying that vault's real?" "Oh, it's real," Martha said quietly. "But so were the men who wanted it forgotten." Ashford vanished. The documents were sealed away, and over generations, whispers turned to myths. Arthur believed those files could expose corruption that still echoes today. Ethan frowned. Why didn't he tell anyone? If it was that important. "He did," Martha interrupted gently. "He told the wrong people." Her eyes darkened. A few months before he died, strangers came to his cabin, men in polished shoes and dark suits. They said they were historians, but their eyes gave them away. Cold. Predatory. They asked about his work, smiled when they spoke, but not with their eyes. After they left, Arthur told me he feared them more than death itself. Cole's jaw tightened. "Helix Corporation." Martha nodded once. "That's what their business card said, Helix Resource Development." They call themselves private developers. In truth, they hunt what others bury, relics, patents, records, anything that can be turned into money or leverage. If Helix is interested in you, you're already in danger. The room went still. Ethan exchanged a grim look with Cole. Shadow's ears pricked, a low growl vibrating softly in his throat. Martha reached across the table and laid a thin, trembling hand on Ethan's arm. Your grandfather trusted you for a reason. But be careful. Helix doesn't negotiate. They eliminate. By dusk, the brothers were back at the shack beside the bunker. The old structure groaned in the wind. Ethan spread the maps across the table, his jaw set as he tried to bring military order to the chaos. Cole paced behind him, restless energy vibrating in every step. Shadow lay near the hearth, ears twitching with every creak outside. Then came a sound that didn't belong. Low at first, then unmistakable, the steady purr of an engine. Ethan's head snapped up. You hear that? Cole was already at the window. Headlights cut through the mist, sharp and white, slicing across the clearing. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop beside their dented pickup, its tires sinking slightly into the mud. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a charcoal overcoat and tailored slacks, clothes that had no place in the Tennessee backwoods. His salt and pepper hair was immaculately cut, his movements measured, almost regal. His smile was easy, practiced. But his eyes, ice blue and exacting, betrayed the truth beneath it, control and calculation. Mr. Mercer, he called smoothly, his voice like polished steel. Richard Vance, Helix Corporation. You have something that belongs to us. Ethan stepped outside, calm but cold. Cole followed, fists tight at his sides. Shadow emerged last, silent and watchful, positioning himself between his humans and the stranger. Vance's gaze flickered toward the dog, amused but cautious. Beautiful animal, he said, though the compliment felt like mockery. I'd suggest keeping him calm. I'd hate for anyone to get hurt. Ethan's tone was steady. We're not selling. Vance's smile widened, though it never reached his eyes. Mr. Mercer, I'm offering a transaction, not a threat. You and your brother have stumbled onto something far beyond your comprehension. Let me relieve you of it. Cole's voice cracked the night like gunfire. Try us. Vance didn't even flinch. You're former Marines. You've seen what happens to men who stand between power and profit. Don't make the same mistake your grandfather did. He named a figure, high enough to buy peace, erase debts, rebuild lives. Ethan's breath hitched. For a moment, Sarah's face flashed in his mind, hospital beds, unpaid bills, her voice whispering hope through pain. The temptation was sharp, almost cruel. But then Shadow's low growl rumbled beside him, grounding him in the present. Ethan looked Vance in the eye. It's not for sale. Vance's smile thinned, turning predatory. Think carefully. Mountains collapse. Men disappear. Even loyal dogs, he trailed off, his tone soft but poisonous. Can be silenced. The growl that rose from Shadow's chest shook the air. His muscles coiled, teeth bared, his amber eyes locked on the intruder. Cole stepped forward, fire blazing in his expression. You've made your offer. Now get off our land before you regret it. For a heartbeat, the clearing held still, only the sound of wind through trees and Shadow's growl vibrating in the air. Then Vance slipped a pristine white card onto the hood of their truck. My offer stands, he said smoothly. Until it doesn't. He turned, climbed back into the SUV, and drove off into the dark, his taillights bleeding red through the mist. When silence returned, it wasn't peace, it was the kind that hums before a storm. Ethan looked out into the empty clearing, his face carved from stone. Cole's fists were still clenched, his pulse hammering. Shadow stayed by their side, his fur raised, his breath steady, a soldier's sentinel. They weren't just heirs to a mystery anymore. They were targets. And Helix had just declared war. The night after Richard Vance's visit passed in uneasy silence. The shack creaked with every gust of wind, its thin walls holding the weight of tension like a drum. Ethan sat at the old table, a mug of black coffee gone cold in his hands. The faint light from the lamp flickered against the compass and cipher spread before him. He hadn't slept. Cole paced near the window like a caged animal, his boots scuffing the floorboards, muttering curses under his breath. Every so often, he'd glance outside, half expecting to see headlights returning through the mist. Shadow lay by the door, but he wasn't resting. His head stayed up, ears turning to every faint sound, his growl a low hum that never truly stopped. Ethan finally spoke, his voice rough. "We can't face Helix alone." Cole turned sharply. "Then what?" "Call the cops. Vance owns them by the dozen." Ethan's gaze stayed fixed on the cold mug in his hands. "No. We call family." He reached for his phone, scrolling through contacts that read like ghosts from another life, Marines he hadn't spoken to since their last deployment. Faces he remembered through smoke and sand. Then he stopped on a name. Rico Alvarez. Rico had been their squad's demolitions and tech specialist, a wiry man with a crooked grin and the kind of instincts that saved lives in chaos. Ethan remembered the way Rico could turn junk metal and spare wiring into a functioning radio, or a controlled explosion, depending on what the situation called for. He hit call. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered, half amused, half wary. "Mercer." "Damn, brother. You only call when things are about to blow up, huh?" Ethan didn't respond right away. That silence was enough. Rico's tone hardened. "Where are you?" By the following evening, the rumble of a rental car engine broke the stillness outside the shack. A layer of dust clung to its hood as it pulled to a stop. Rico stepped out, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, dark jeans and a weathered jacket his only armor. His hair, once jet black, was now streaked with gray, tied loosely at the back. His lean frame moved with a coiled readiness, the same balance between tension and ease that had made him dangerous in the field. He took in the scene, the bunker half buried in fog, the rusted pickup, the shack with its one dim light glowing through the window. His crooked smile faltered. "You two look like hell," he said, clasping Ethan's hand in a firm shake before pulling Cole into a brief half-hug. Shadow trotted forward, sniffing the newcomer. Recognition flickered in his amber eyes, followed by a short, approving bark. Rico chuckled, scratching behind his ears. "Still got the best nose in the business." Inside, the brothers told him everything, the inheritance, the cipher, the bunker, Martha's warnings, Vance's threats. Rico listened in silence, eyes sharp and calculating, hands steepled beneath his chin. He examined the compass, ran his fingers over the cipher's markings, flipped through Arthur Callahan's journals. When they finished, he leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "This isn't just a bunker," he said slowly. "It's a machine." Cole frowned. "A what?" "A hydraulic fortress," Rico explained, his voice low with a mix of awe and concern. "See these diagrams? Floodgates, pressure locks, reset systems. Ashford didn't just hide his vault, he built a living trap around it." He nodded toward the bunker entrance. "Your grandpa wasn't chasing fairy tales. He was trying to keep something buried, and judging by the company knocking at your door, that something still scares people with money. They turned the bunker into their command post." Rico unpacked tools from his duffel, pliers, voltage meters, rolls of wire, compact breaching charges. He set up his laptop on the rusted table, powering it through a portable battery. Cole pinned maps to the wall using knives. Ethan stood by the doorway, his marine instincts keeping watch, though his gaze sometimes drifted to the photograph of Sarah he still kept folded in his wallet. Shadow moved constantly, pacing, sniffing, alert. It was he who made the next discovery. While the men debated over schematics, Shadow padded to the far wall and began sniffing along the concrete. He whined, then pawed at a small, discolored patch. The sound echoed through the bunker. Ethan turned. "What is it, boy?" Shadow dug harder, claws scraping stone. Cole pressed his palms to the wall and felt a hollow vibration. "There's something here." Rico grabbed a crowbar. "Let's find out." Together they pried at the surface until the wall gave way with a grinding groan, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a flat, heavy metal box coated in dust. Ethan brushed it clean, and Cole carefully unlatched it. Inside, the air seemed to still. On top rested a folded letter, written in precise, old-fashioned script. Beneath it, a parchment schematic of gears, levers, and water channels. And nestled at the bottom in a velvet-lined slot was a brass key engraved with an insignia, a stylized A. Ethan picked up the letter, his hands trembling. He began to read aloud. It was the confession of Colonel Thomas Ashford. The colonel wrote of how he discovered corruption within his own command, Union officers who had siphoned soldiers' pay and buried the truth. To protect his evidence, he created a vault sealed within the mountain, guarded by engineering traps only he could open. The documents, he swore, were proof of crimes that would destroy reputations and empires. Cole's voice broke the silence. He didn't hide gold. He hid the truth. But the discovery didn't end there. At the bottom of the box were a handful of newer pages, Arthur Callahan's handwriting. The ink was unsteady, as if written by a shaking hand. His final journal entries. The first spoke of Helix. He described strangers following him, his brakes failing, the feeling of being watched. The next was worse, a confession that made Ethan's breath catch. Arthur had traced Helix's reach through shell companies and medical subsidiaries, firms that manipulated insurance approvals and treatment schedules for profit. One name among those documents struck Ethan like a bullet, Sarah Mercer. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft rasp of Ethan's breathing. Arthur's words were clear, he believed Helix had deliberately delayed Sarah's treatment. She had been, financially unviable. Her life had been measured and discarded. Ethan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the pages. The image of Sarah flooded his mind, her frail body in a hospital bed, her auburn hair thinning, her voice whispering through pain, "Keep fighting, Ethan." His voice broke. "They killed her," he whispered. "Not the cancer, them." Shadow pressed against his leg, sensing the storm rising inside him. Cole reached out, resting a hand on his brother's shoulder. His own face was tight with fury. Rico's jaw clenched, the humor he always carried was gone. Rico spoke softly but firmly. "Then this isn't about inheritance anymore. It's about justice." He tapped the schematic with one finger. "We have the cipher, the key, and proof Helix would kill to hide. So we move like soldiers. We plan, we prepare, and we finish what your grandfather started." The three men stood there in the dim light of the bunker, surrounded by maps, journals, and ghosts of the past. Shadow sat between them, his amber eyes glowing steady, the living link between what had been lost and what could still be reclaimed. For Ethan Mercer, grief hardened into something sharper than anger. It became purpose. The war wasn't over. It had just changed battlefields. The first warning came at dawn, not in words, but in vibration. A deep, rhythmic tremor rolled beneath the earth, rattling the loose panes of the shack windows. Ethan woke instantly, instincts snapping to attention. Outside, a low roar carried through the mist, the sound of heavy machinery chewing through rock. Cole burst through the door, shotgun in hand. "They're drilling," he said, eyes blazing. "Helix is coming down through the ridge." Ethan stepped outside, his breath turning white in the morning chill. Across the valley, above the tree line, he could see flashes of movement, industrial rigs, floodlights, and mechanical arms tearing at the soil. Dust clouds rose against the pale dawn sky. Rico joined them, tablet in hand, his face lit by the faint glow of seismic readings. "They're boring straight through the mountain," he said grimly. "They don't care if they bring the whole place down. They're trying to reach the vault before we do." Each vibration pulsed like a countdown. Each shudder of earth felt like a ticking clock. Shadow stood near the shack's door, hackles raised, growling low. His amber eyes reflected the tremor of movement across the distant ridge. He could smell it: engines, oil, men. Danger. Cole slammed a fist into his palm. "Then we move first. I'm not letting them bury what Grandpa died to protect, or Sarah's truth along with it." Ethan looked toward the horizon, his jaw set hard. For a moment, he could see Sarah again, lying weak in that sterile hospital bed, her hand gripping his, her voice whispering through labored breaths, "Fight for what matters." He nodded once, steady and sure. "Gear up." They moved with purpose. Ethan checked his sidearm and strapped a tactical harness across his chest. Cole loaded the shotgun, shells clinking as he slid them into place. Rico secured his vest, filling it with compact charges, detonators, and tools. The cipher and compass went into Ethan's jacket pocket. The brass key hung around his neck on a cord. Shadow circled near the door, impatient to move, his tail rigid, muscles rippling beneath his coat. They descended into the bunker again, flashlights cutting through the dark like thin blades. The air grew colder with each step. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing faintly down the stairwell. Rico's voice was low, focused. "If Helix breaches from above, we'll feel the pressure before we hear it. The mountain's going to shake itself apart." Cole grinned, fierce. "Then we finish fast." The tunnel swallowed them, narrow, twisting, the walls lined with aged timber and stone. Chalk marks from Arthur Callahan still lingered in places, faded but legible: arrows. Numbers. Caution. The first trap announced itself with sound. A soft gurgle that became a steady hiss. Rico crouched, flashlight sweeping over the ground. "Stop. See those grooves? Pressure plates." He pointed to faint metal ridges embedded in the dirt. "This corridor's a hydraulic floodgate. One wrong step, and the whole place fills like a coffin." Cole shifted uneasily, testing the air with slow breath. "So what's the right step?" Ethan pulled the compass and the cipher sheet from his pocket, aligning the markings to the journal notes. "There's a safe route. Narrow, but it's there." He led carefully, every step measured. His boot landed only on the patches of solid ground between the plates. Cole followed close behind, Rico bringing up the rear, scanning for tripwires or sensors. Above them, faint tremors pulsed through the walls, Helix's drills digging deeper. Dust rained from the ceiling in fine streams. Cole muttered under his breath, "Feels like the mountains breathing down our necks." Then it happened. Ethan lifted his boot toward the next stone, confident in the path, and Shadow lunged. The German shepherd's jaws clamped onto Ethan's pant leg, yanking him backward with stunning force. Ethan stumbled, hitting the wall hard just as the ground where he'd meant to step gave a sudden hiss. A panel of earth shifted. Water spurted up, spraying cold across the tunnel before settling again. One more ounce of pressure, and the floodgate would have opened. Ethan froze, his chest heaving. Shadow released him and stepped back, tail rigid, eyes blazing. The dog let out a short, warning bark, not fear, but command. Cole swore under his breath. "He just saved your life." Rico crouched beside the trigger plate, running his fingers over the groove. "The mutt's got better instincts than any tech I could build." He glanced up at Ethan, a rare flicker of a grin tugging at his lips. Ethan knelt beside Shadow, resting a hand against the dog's strong neck. "Good boy," he murmured, his voice rough with gratitude. Shadow leaned against him once before stepping forward again, nose to the ground, resuming his place at point. They pressed on. The tunnel wound deeper, tighter, colder. The air thickened with moisture. Every few minutes, the ceiling quaked, shaking loose pebbles that clattered onto their helmets and shoulders. Rico checked his readings again, his tone clipped. "We've got minutes before those drills hit the chamber. If we're still inside when that happens, we're history." The passage opened suddenly into a vast cavern, stalactites hanging like jagged teeth, pools of water reflecting their flashlights in rippling silver. Arthur's chalk marks ended here. Whatever guidance he had left had long since washed away. Ethan unrolled the cipher and the map again, aligning the compass needle. The direction points to the steel door Shadow found before. That's where the map ends, and where the truth begins. Cole reloaded his shotgun, his voice steady but burning with adrenaline. "Then that's where we go." They moved as one, a practiced formation of old instincts and mutual trust. Above them, the mountain roared. The sound of drilling grew louder, vibrating through the floor like thunder. But down here, under layers of earth and history, 3 Marines and 1 loyal German shepherd pressed forward, racing against time and greed. Their breath came hard and fast, the lights trembling in their hands, shadows dancing wildly against the walls. When they reached the junction, Shadow halted. His body stiffened, his ears pricked, his eyes fixed forward. He turned his head slightly, waiting for Ethan's cue. Before them loomed the same rusted steel door, the one that had haunted their thoughts since the night they first found it. The cipher. The compass. The key. Everything had led to this point. Ethan tightened his grip on the compass, his pulse steadying. "This is it," he said quietly. "The vault our grandfather died for." Cole stepped up beside him, face lit by the beam of his flashlight. "Then let's finish it." Behind them, Rico adjusted his gear, checking one last time for traps. Shadow waited, silent and unyielding. The air around them thrummed, not just with danger, but with destiny. Whatever lay beyond that door wasn't just treasure or truth. It was the end of everything they'd been running from, and the start of what they were meant to fight for. The tunnel trembled around them, dust spilling from the ceiling as the helix drills thundered above. The roar of machinery had become a heartbeat, deep, constant, and closing in. Ethan stood before the door, the brass key glinting in his hand. He glanced once at Cole, then at Rico, whose steady gaze met his in silent understanding. Shadow waited in front of them, every muscle taut, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the flashlight beams. Ethan slid the key into the small ornate keyhole at the center of the door. It fit perfectly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a deep metallic thud rolled through the tunnel, followed by the grinding of ancient bolts unlocking. The ground seemed to hum as the mechanism shifted. After a century of silence, the door began to move, inch by inch, groaning open against time itself. Cold, stale air spilled out from the blackness beyond. Ethan raised his flashlight and stepped forward. What the beam revealed made them all stop breathing. The chamber was vast, carved directly into the rock, its walls lined with wooden chests bound in iron. Gold gleamed faintly through the cracked lids, bars stacked neatly like bricks. But it wasn't the gold that caught Ethan's eye. Across the opposite wall were shelves carved into the stone itself, filled with sealed metal document cases. Each bore faded Union insignias, some marked confidential, others simply labeled with names and dates, 1864, 1871, 1905, records stretching across generations. Rico let out a low whistle. "Madre de Dios," he murmured. "This isn't treasure. This is history's crime scene." Cole's eyes reflected the light of gold and revelation. "He was right, Ethan. Grandpa was right all along." Ethan moved closer to one of the shelves, running his hand along a metal case. His thumb brushed a nameplate etched with an officer's rank and date. These files could expose everything, the theft, the corruption, the roots of Helix itself. Rico nodded slowly. "And they've been killing for over a century to keep it buried." Shadow paced the room, nose twitching, his tail stiff. He stopped suddenly near one of the gold chests and turned sharply toward the tunnel. His ears pricked, his head low, a low growl building in his throat. Ethan stiffened. He heard it too. Footsteps, fast, deliberate, closing in. Then a voice followed, smooth, cold, and far too familiar. Magnificent, isn't it? They turned as Richard Vance stepped through the doorway, framed by the beam of his own flashlight. His tailored coat was smeared with dust now, his perfect hair disheveled, but his smile, that same predatory smile, hadn't faded. 2 armed men flanked him, dressed in tactical black gear, rifles raised. Vance's blue eyes glimmered with triumph. "You did the hard work for us, gentlemen. My company thanks you." Ethan drew his pistol, leveling it on him. "You don't belong here." Vance tilted his head. "Neither do you. This vault doesn't hold salvation, it holds liability. Evidence that could ruin governments, topple industries, and cost billions. We intend to make sure it stays where it belongs, forgotten." Cole's jaw clenched, fire burning behind his hazel eyes. "Over my dead body." Vance's smile sharpened. "That can be arranged." The room went still. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the hum of distant drills and the soft rasp of Shadow's growl. Then everything exploded into motion. Cole shouted, "Ethan, down," and lunged sideways. The gunman opened fire, bullets cracking through the chamber, ricocheting off the stone walls. Shadow leapt like lightning, a streak of silver-gray muscle and fury, straight at Vance. The pistol in Vance's hand fired once, the shot going wild as the dog slammed into him. They crashed to the floor, Vance's weapon skittering away into the dark. Shadow's teeth sank into fabric and flesh, ripping through Vance's sleeve, forcing a scream from the man who had never screamed before. Ethan dropped behind a chest, firing twice toward the attackers. One gunman fell, his rifle clattering away. Rico moved fast, grabbing the fallen weapon and pivoting, his movements precise and deadly, the rhythm of a man who'd spent a lifetime balancing chaos. Cole barreled into the second gunman, driving him backward into a chest of gold bars. The impact sent metal clanging across the floor as the 2 men fought in a blur of fists and fury. Shadow held Vance pinned, growling low and deep, his fangs inches from the man's throat. Vance's once polished composure shattered, his ice-blue eyes wide with panic. "Call him off." Vance gasped, voice breaking. "Call him off." Ethan rose slowly, his weapon steady, eyes burning. "You tried to kill my wife with paperwork," he said, voice like steel. "You don't get mercy." Before he could take another step, a new sound filled the chamber, not the drills, not the growls, but a sharp voice echoing through the tunnel. "Federal agents. Drop your weapons." Flashlights flared at the entrance, blinding bright. A dozen figures in tactical gear swept in, their vests marked with 3 bold letters, FBI. "Hands where we can see them," the lead agent barked. Cole froze mid-punch, breath heaving. Rico let the rifle fall with a heavy clatter. Ethan lowered his weapon but didn't move from in front of Vance. Shadow growled once more before Ethan murmured his name. The dog hesitated, then stepped back, still watching Vance with burning eyes. The lead agent, a man in his 50s with gray-streaked hair and calm brown eyes, approached slowly. "Richard Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Vance stared up from the floor, blood streaking his sleeve, disbelief written across his once perfect face. "You don't know what you're interfering with," he hissed. "Helix is bigger than any of you." The agent didn't flinch. "Bigger than justice? We'll see." He turned to Ethan, his expression softening with recognition. "Mr. Mercer. We received your grandfather's contingency package years ago. When Mrs. Hayes called, we knew it was time. Arthur trusted us to come when Helix made its move." Ethan blinked, the words hitting him like a weight lifted. "You mean, he planned for this?" The agent nodded. Every detail. Your grandfather was a soldier to the end. Behind them, Vance snarled as agents wrenched his arms behind his back and snapped on handcuffs. You think this ends with me? You can't stop what's already in motion. Shadow barked sharply, once, loud and final, a sound that echoed off the stone like judgment itself. Vance fell silent. Ethan looked around the chamber, at the gold, the files, the weight of truth his grandfather had given his life to uncover. Cole leaned against a chest, breathing hard, a cut bleeding along his cheek but his eyes fierce and bright. Rico crouched nearby, catching his breath, a faint, weary grin tugging at his lips. Shadow stood in the center of it all, head high, fur bristling, amber eyes steady. The guardian of every life that still mattered. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he hadn't since Sarah died. Not relief. Not even peace. Victory. As the agents led Vance away, his voice vanished down the tunnel, swallowed by the echo of his own chains. Ethan looked down at Shadow, kneeling to rest his hand on the dog's back. We did it, boy, he said quietly. We did it. The shepherd's tail gave one slow, proud wag. The mountain had kept its secrets long enough. And now, at last, the truth had come into the light. 3 months later, the mountain was quiet again. The drills were gone, the air was clean, and the valley that once shook with conflict now breathed with calm. Snow had settled on the ridges like a white shroud, sealing the scars left by Helix's invasion. Ethan stood on the overlook above the bunker, hands in the pockets of his worn jacket. Below him, the excavation site had been cordoned off by federal authorities. Floodlights stood silent now, their cables coiled like resting serpents. What had once been a battlefield was returning to silence, not the kind born of secrecy, but of peace. Beside him sat Shadow, still vigilant even in stillness. The German shepherd's coat gleamed in the pale morning sun, his breath steaming in slow rhythm. His ears twitched at every bird call, every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind that dared disturb the calm. Cole joined them, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He handed one to Ethan and leaned on the railing, his voice lighter than it had been in months. You ever think we'd see this mountain quiet again? Ethan smiled faintly. Not like this. Down in the valley, federal vehicles came and went, evidence teams cataloging crates, files, and relics from the Ashford vault. The gold was bound for federal reserves, but the documents, those were different. Those files, the ones Arthur Callahan and Colonel Ashford had both died to protect, had become the cornerstone of the biggest government investigation in half a century. The exposure of Helix Corporation had spread like wildfire. Executives were arrested. Assets frozen. Satellite companies dissolved. The headlines called it the Ashford Revelation. But for Ethan, the victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in something quieter. Sarah's name, once buried under corporate paperwork, now appeared in official testimony. Her story had become a symbol for every patient the company had exploited. The foundation established in her honor, the Sarah Mercer Fund, was created to provide affordable treatment for those denied by private systems. It was funded, in part, by the recovered gold. Rico, ever the man who thrived on movement, had stayed long enough to help the investigation before heading overseas again, consulting for security work in disaster zones. His goodbye had been simple, a firm handshake, a grin, and a promise, if another mountain starts rumbling, you know who to call. Martha Hayes, ever the quiet sentinel of memory, had passed the torch of stewardship to the brothers. Before she left Hillsborough for good, she'd pressed Arthur's compass into Ethan's palm. This was always meant to guide you, she'd said. And it still will, if you trust what's right, not just what's easy. Now, that compass hung around Ethan's neck. The brothers worked together again, not as Marines, not as soldiers, but as builders. They had restored the old scrapyard, turning it into a community repair workshop, a place where veterans and locals worked side by side. Cole handled the business, Ethan managed logistics, and Shadow, ever faithful, guarded the gate. The dog had become something of a legend in town. Kids came by to see him, their laughter ringing across the lot as he trotted proudly beside them. Cole had painted a small wooden sign near the entrance. Shadows watch, honoring those who protect what's worth saving. One evening, as the sky bled gold and violet over the hills, Ethan stood outside the workshop, watching the sunset reflect off the metal scraps that littered the yard. The quiet hum of welding and the chatter of workers filled the background, a song of new beginnings. Cole joined him, tossing him a wrench with a grin. "You thinking or just brooding again?" Ethan smirked faintly. "Bit of both." Cole nodded toward the mountain. "You ever think about going back down there?" Ethan's eyes softened. "No. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Grandpa knew that." Shadow barked once from near the open gate, a low, proud sound that echoed across the yard. Ethan turned toward him, smiling. The dog's muzzle had started to gray at the edges, but his eyes were still sharp, still unyielding. Ethan crouched beside him, scratching gently behind his ears. "You did good, boy. You did more than anyone ever could." Shadow leaned against him, closing his eyes in the comfort of familiarity. For a moment, everything, war, loss, vengeance, melted into something simpler. Loyalty. Family. Peace. As dusk deepened, the yard lights flickered on, casting long, warm beams across the snow-dusted ground. The world felt still again, not because it was empty, but because it was whole. Ethan glanced once more toward the mountain. He could almost hear Arthur Callahan's voice, gravelly but warm, echoing from memory, "The truth isn't buried, son. It just waits for the right hands to lift it." He straightened, his gaze steady. "We lifted it, Grandpa," he whispered. "We finally did." Cole approached with 2 beers and handed one to him. "To Sarah," he said quietly. Ethan nodded, raising the bottle. "To Sarah. To Grandpa. And to the damn dog who never gave up." Shadow barked softly, as if in agreement. The brothers laughed, real laughter this time, the kind that carried no bitterness, only gratitude. The sound drifted into the night, up the mountain, and out across the silent valley. Above them, the stars emerged, cold, bright, eternal, the same ones that had watched over soldiers, dreamers, and guardians alike. And beneath those stars, the legacy of courage, love, and truth endured, not in gold, not in vaults, but in the quiet heartbeat of 2 brothers and the loyal German shepherd who had led them through the dark.